Welcome to Book Buzz, everybody. Um, we are the Westwood Librarians, and we've been reading a ton in the past year, and it's National Library Week. And so something special we wanted to do was share some books. Some of them are brand new, some of them came out a couple of months ago. And hopefully you'll find something that you had not read yet, or if you have read it, we would love to hear from you. This is informal. We can talk back and forth. I'm going to share a slideshow, but first I thought it would be great if we go around. Our panelists are going to talk a little bit about what we like to read and introduce ourselves. So I'm Lizzie McGovern. I work in children's and I'm currently the interim director. I love to read a little bit of everything. Of course, I read tons of middle grade and children's books, and I love romance novels, and Christy and Liz will give me a thriller or two to read here and there. And I'm looking to read a little bit more historical fiction because I feel like I haven't, I want to kind of dive back into that. I read a lot of that when I was younger. So if you have a good rec, I would love to hear it. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to pass the torch to Miss Patty Wade.
Hello, I'm Patty Wade. I work in circulation here at the library, and I tend to read a lot of nonfiction. I really enjoy a good book that started out as investigative journalism and then turned into a book. I love a good memoir. I like historical fiction and, a mixed bag of many other things too.
And now she's our resident nonfiction reader in the library. And Christy, how about you go?
Hi, I'm Christy Pasquarello. I work in the children's department. I read a lot of middle grade, and I also read a lot of young adult. And with adult books, I love thrillers, literary fiction. I don't like romance.
We argue about that a lot.
I've tried very hard. Unless it's historical, then maybe. And I also want to read more historical fiction, but I tend to love middle grade historical fiction.
Yes, yeah.
The most. But I will try anything. So.
Christy Pasquarello, she'll try anything. Okay, Liz, do you want to tell us about what you like to read?
Sure. I'm Liz Keefe. I work in tech services at the library, and I like to read mysteries, thrillers. I like literary fiction, and I like YA. I do not read a lot of historical fiction, but I do like it when I do read it.
So feel bad. That was not a prerequisite that you have to read it. It was just something that as I would my own summer reading, as we get into like different seasons, I like, Christy once made a little bingo card for herself. And I love that idea of like, okay, what do I want to read? Like, I don't read a lot of memoirs. And so in my head, I'm like, I want to read a really good historical fiction. So that's what popped out to me. And Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline Ty. I work in circulation and a little bit in reference. And I like to read a little bit of everything too. The thrillers, YA, not so much historical fiction, but I do like romance. But like Liz, when I do read historical fiction, I tend to like it. I'm just not drawn to it unless it's set in like the 80s or 90s.
Oh, right. Yeah, that counts as historical fiction now. Does a 90s book count as historical fiction? Wow, that's mind-blowing. Okay.
I have one.
Okay, and introducing, I want to do a drum roll for Miss Abby Walsh. She is our new head of reference in adult services.
Hi, everyone. I may have quite a delay, so I apologize about that. I'm Abby. It's so nice to meet you. I'm just really distracted that I get to see my colleagues' faces.
Without our mask.
I've seen everyone just with the mask, so it's so nice to see everyone's faces. So I'm a little bit distracted, but I won't let that distract me from talking about books. I'm a huge fan of thrillers, whodunits, mysteries, and picture books. So I feel like I'm living in two worlds. One with I'm reading along with my own kids, but also escaping into the world of thrillers, and that's really how I escape, and I'm escaping these days. And I do like a good nonfiction that reads like a thriller. And what I'm really excited about just to be joining Westwood is the fact that I get to dive into books and do these types of events and really get my pulse on like the hottest top titles, but also titles that are really highly recommended that may not be in the mainstream. So I'm really excited to be part of this group. So thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope technology holds up. Okay. Ta-da! So book buzz, favorite reads from Westwood Librarians. So I'm going to start. This book is, I think it came out a couple months ago. It's called Finley Donovan is Killing It. It's a mystery. It's by Elle Cosimano, and she won an Edgar Award for a YA debut, which I have not read. But this one I picked up because I loved the cover. And the blurb, to give you fast, is Finley is a single mother of 2 young kids. She has a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. She is recently, her husband divorced her because they bought a brand new townhouse outside of Washington, D.C. He fell in love with the real estate agent who sold them the house and bought a house down the road. And he basically is taking her for the long road for custody. And so she has, she, by her career as a working mother, is being a romance mystery writer. She has a deadline for her newest book. She doesn't make a ton of money for her books. They kind of have a small audience, but she's struggling to kind of keep that going. So the opening day is her daughter, first thing in the morning, decides to cut her own hair, 4 years old, cuts it so much that she actually shorns, like she gets a little bit of scalp, and she looks down, she's like, oh no, the babysitter, her ex-husband has fired the nanny because he was paying for it. So she has to get a meeting to her agent, and her 2-year-old has like maple syrup all over herself. And the little girl keeps saying, her daughter keeps saying, fix my hair, paste it. Daddy would fix it. Daddy fixes everything with duct tape. And so she's at her wit's end, and she's like, okay, you want me to paste? She takes some duct tape and she just tapes the hair back on her head, puts a little beanie cap on it, and sends her to daycare. And in her diaper bag purse, she has the duct tape. She has, a baby blanket that she was using that had a little bit of blood on it. And she rushes out the door and she puts on her sunglasses, and she has this kind of author photo where she wears a blonde wig, and it's her persona for her writer. And so she meets her agent at a Panera, and they're having a fierce conversation about her new book, which she's going into a murder mystery. She's kind of diving from a romance to this, story, and she's kind of making it up as she goes to try to sell it. Like, oh no, I've got a plan. She hasn't written any of it. And she starts talking about, a murder for hire. This woman looks over at her at a table eating her soup, just kind of keeps glancing at her, and looks down at her bag and sees, the duct tape and a bloody blanket, and kind of jumps to conclusions. And so when Finley gets back to her car, she sees a note on her windshield, and this woman is offering her $50,000 to kill for her abusive husband. And Finley's like, okay, that's I don't know, where did she go? It has a phone number on it. And she's going to rip it up and get rid of it. She stuffs it in her bag. And as her day progresses, and her husband, the bills are stacking up, her husband is sending a really high powered lawyer. She starts toying with the idea of $50,000 and what she could do. And she keeps saying, well, I could get to keep my kids. So I don't want to, it's hilarious at times. It sounds dark, but she goes, what could it hurt to scope him out, just to put his name in Facebook, see what this guy is. Is he really a bad guy? And one thing leads to another, that at times I was like, I listened to this. So I was driving, and I almost should have pulled over. I was laughing because it's very clever how this accident of kind of scoping him out ends up, she gets warped into this murder mystery. And then she starts, inspires her to write it. And I was like, there's no way she's getting out of this. Like, this has become, and when her nanny gets involved, and you really feel for Finley and her situation, and you kind of want to win for her. And it's realistic enough that you're like, if I was in that situation and this happened, because, when you get to the crux, I won't spoil it, you're kind of invested enough. And this is the first, it will be a series featuring Finley. So it's a mystery. It's pretty fast paced, but if you don't like romance, as Christy does not, this is similar in terms of it's lighthearted. There is a side romance, but it's not a happily ever after. It's not a meet cute. I mean, it has a little bit of that, but it's much more of like a very lighthearted, it sounds funny to say, a fun murder mystery. But it definitely reads that way for you. Get that little bit of escapism, and you laugh out loud. So that is my pick for Finley Donovan is Killing It. And next up is Liz.
Thank you. And so I chose And Now She's Gone, which is, I want to say it's a mystery, not a thriller. So it is about Grayson Sykes, and she is just been promoted to be a full-fledged private investigator at her firm, Rader Consulting. And her first case that's assigned to her by her boss, Nick, is a missing woman. She was reported missing to Nick by a doctor, and she stole his dog or disappeared with the dog. And so Grayson starts looking for her. But the more she investigates, the less she likes Ian O'Donnell, the boyfriend that reported her missing. She seems to think that Ian's more invested in finding the dog than finding Isabel. So
How fancy is this dog, Liz? Is it a rare breed?
maybe it's a Labradoodle? And so Grayson keeps investigating, and the more she investigates, the more complicated Isabel's past is, and the more she finds out about her, the more she starts to identify with her, and because Grayson has some dark history in her past, and she's sort of seeing some parallels with her life and Isabel's, but the more she investigates, it just becomes really complicated. And an added complication is that Grayson's dark past seems to be coming back. And, so she's on edge, she's scared, and but very determined to solve her first case. And it was definitely an interesting read, definitely a character you're rooting for. And I thought that Grayson was definitely complex and interesting, and it definitely deals with issues like race, sexism, violence. So, but I really enjoyed it, and I think you guys will too.
Thank you. Who do we have next? Oh, Patty.
So The Splendid and the Vile, a saga of Churchill family and defiance during the Blitz. It's actually about a little over a year old. It was a 2020 book. I didn't tend to read a ton of nonfiction during the pandemic because I was tending towards lighter, feel good, happy ending types of things that I don't necessarily feel myself drawn to when it's not a pandemic. So, but this one was an excellent book, and I have read several books about Churchill. This one interested me probably the most of all that I have read about him, because Eric Larson, the author, chose to cover just a 1-year period in Churchill's life. And it was May 10th, 1940 to May 10th, 1941. And Eric Larson says this is the year in which Churchill became Churchill, a cigar smoking bulldog that we all think we know.
Yeah.
And it starts out as Hitler has just invaded Belgium, Luxembourg, and Holland. And Neville Chamberlain, the prime minister, is resigning. So there's two possibilities on who could be the next prime minister, and it ends up being Churchill, as we know. The rest is history. But it really is a fascinating book, because Eric Larson says this is the year in which he made his greatest speeches, and where he really demonstrated the courage and the leadership that were really so extraordinary. And during this 1-year period, there were 57 consecutive nights of bombings in the city of London, followed by another 6 months of air raids. And one of the things that I think Larson does a really masterful job at is creating the atmosphere. You feel like you are actually in a blackout. You feel like you're rationing, and the fear and the resilience. His descriptions were very powerful, and he relied on diaries and public documents to write the book. So I highly recommend this book. I think it was really fascinating. I listened to some of it and read it. I had kind of two things going, but if you like audiobooks, this audiobook is excellent. It's got a classic British narrator with that sort of like you know, stilted, I guess you'd say, British, you know, clipped speech that you feel like you're watching some of the old documentaries that were made, you know, during King George V and King George VI. So it's an excellent book, and I would highly recommend this.
I can see why you didn't necessarily want to read that during the pandemic, especially the early days when it felt like, okay, rationing and blackouts and,
Yeah.
you know, teach us lesson in blitz spirit. How long is this book? Because this is what always scares me about nonfiction.
This, well, let me tell you exactly, because I have a copy of it
Oh, you
right
do?
here.
I thought
It is 500.
Oh,
It's like 500 and something pages, and he actually says that he decided to write this book when he moved to Manhattan. And as he was first living in Manhattan, he was thinking about how different the experience was for 9/11 for the people who were living in Manhattan at the time.
wow.
And then it led him to be thinking about, like, wow, that, imagine how the citizens, the British citizens, lived, waiting every night, you
Yeah.
know, with these blackouts. And so that was sort of like his genesis, his idea was when he moved to Manhattan.
Wow. Thank you, Patty. You sold me. And Caroline, I don't know where you are. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi. So my first book is, now we know, technically historical fiction, as it takes place in the 90s, but it's Bellwether Rhapsody by Peculia. I'm not really sure about the pronunciation there, but it's about one of those grand old hotels in the Catskill where 15 years ago there is a murder-suicide in room 712 of a bride and a groom, and it's witnessed by this young bridesmaid. So 15 years later, she comes back to the hotel because it's ruined her life and she wants to face her fears. And there is a music festival of high school musicians there, hundreds and hundreds of students. And over the course of the weekend, another girl goes missing from the same room, which is witnessed by her roommate. She sees her hanging like the bride did, and she leaves to get help, and she comes back, and now she's missing. And there's a note that says she's mine now. So it all takes place over this one weekend. And it sounds like a thriller, like a scary thriller,
Yeah.
but really not. Oddly.
Tell me it's like a heartwarming, like.
It's not, right?
It's really good, and it's not as disturbing as it sounds.
It is
A murder. It's just a light murder suicide.
Murder suicide
in the Catskills.
I saw it was called A Cozy Mystery, which might be a stretch. It was they said a cross between Stephen King and A Cozy Mystery. It's really more of
that is quite a cross.
Yeah,
That's not a great cross.
really, I haven't read anything like it. It's really, really different, and there's lots of characters and lots of 90s references, and it doesn't sound like it's fun, but it really kind of is, and has all the feels.
I think it was I remember that the characters are really quirky. Is that right, Caroline?
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
part of what makes it feel like a cozy mystery, is there's really quirky, funny characters.
Well drawn out.
Yeah.
oh, great. Oh, Christy, for you.
Me. So my first pick is The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley. Let's just take a second and admire this amazing cover, which is
gorgeous
mesmerizing
cover.
to look at. This is, you can see the sticker. It was Reese Witherspoon's YA book club pick. I think she's doing seasonal picks for her YA book club. So this was her spring pick, which is exciting. And also this book has been optioned to be made into a series for Amazon by the Obamas. So they have a production company, or maybe not, maybe Netflix, but the Obamas have a production company, and they're going to be turning this into a TV series. So that's very exciting. So this book is super complicated plot, and I don't want to, I have to be very careful because part of the fun of reading it is
Mhm.
there's it's a mystery and there are reveals along the way. So I want to be careful about not revealing anything, and Lizzie can help me because she read it recently too. So our main
Christy finished it before me, I will say. And so every time I come into work, I go, is this the person? Is this it? And Christy, like, I can't even talk to you about it because it's like, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot happens. So our main character is Donna Fontaine. She's recently graduated high school, and she is living in a place called Sault Ste. Marie, which is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right near Canada, or Canada's across the water. So she's deferring her first year of college. She wants to become a doctor. She's deferring her first year because her grandmother has just had a stroke, and her mother's been taking care of her. And her beloved Uncle David recently died. Apparently he overdosed. And so her mother is really struggling because it was her brother, and now her mother has had a stroke. So she decides to defer her year and stay home and help her mother. And so let me give you a little background on her family. So she is mixed race. Her mother is from the Fontaine family, which is this wealthy family in town. Everybody knows who they are. Their names are on buildings, things like that. And her father was part of the Anishinaabe tribe. He's native. And when they were young, they were in a relationship together, her mother and father, and her mother got pregnant. I think, were they in high school, Lizzie, or they were very young?
They were like their senior year, like under 18, definitely. Yeah.
And so her father was like a star hockey player, and her mother was like the young, like wealthy, like white princess in town. And she gets pregnant and she gets sent away. And then when she comes back, her former boyfriend is with another woman, and that woman is pregnant. Right, Lizzie? Yes.
Yeah, he did her wrong.
Yes. So
he was tricked. Sorry.
So her parents never had the opportunity to be together, but she grows up and she has this half brother, Levi, whose name is Levi Firekeeper because her father's last name was Firekeeper. And so he's less than a year younger than her, and they're half siblings.
Yeah, they're really
she
close.
Loves him. They're very close. They both are really good at hockey like their father was. So she's sort of grown up like straddling these two communities. And she doesn't feel like she belongs in either one. She doesn't feel native enough. She doesn't feel white enough. So she's sort of in that middle place. And so when the story opens, so she's just she fills her days with, she wakes up, she goes on this long run, and then she goes to visit her grandmother in her care facility. And then she spends time with her best friend, Lily. And then she also volunteers at it's like a community center for Native elders. And then she also plays hockey. So she has this full life. She teaches kids to play hockey. And then tragedy strikes. I can't tell you what happens, but tragedy strikes, and then it strikes again. And basically, members of her community, kids her own age, kids she went to high school with, are dying. And it appears that she knows that drugs circulate in her community, but it appears that there's this dangerous form of meth that's been circulating, and some kids are overdosing. Or just ending up dead. And so Donna finds herself drawn into the mystery of what's happening. And there's I can't tell you too much without ruining the story, but there's a lot of connections to her past, to her friends in high school, to her community, to both sides of her community, her white family or Native family. And there's a lot of things happen. She has to sort of keep her secrets now from the people that she's super close with. So she's struggling with that. But it's such a great story. When I wrote my review of this in Goodreads, because I track everything I read in Goodreads or I forget a week later, I said that it was like, I had a lot of my favorite genres mixed up in one book. So I know I said I don't like romance, but I like when there's romance in a book. I just tend to not like the like contemporary romance books. But there's a very swoony romance in this book, strangely enough. There's a mystery. It feels like a classic young adult book in a lot of ways because Donna's is coming of age. She's trying to figure out who she is. You learn so much about Ojibwe culture and her Anishinaabe tribe. And I listened to it so good on audio. If you're an audiobook person, you can hear a lot of the native languages used. You get to hear it, it's very hard for white people to understand native words, to try to read them. And so it was wonderful to hear it spoken. There's even a little bit of singing and poetry that comes out in the book or in the audiobook. And another thing, I know I'm talking too much, I'll stop. But this book also reminded me a lot of The Hate You Give, because The Hate You Give at its center had this really tragic story. It was really sad. But at the same time, when you read it, you weren't super, it wasn't a miserable, like really upsetting reading experience. You learned so much, and the character, you just love the characters so much. I loved Star, and I loved Star's dad. And it's similar in this book. There's a lot of really hard and sad things that happen, but you learn so much about Ojibwe culture.
Yeah.
And I just loved Donis, and another character who I can't talk about because it will be too spoilery, but I would have read like a whole series of books with them, like, you know, solving mysteries together. Like that, it just has so many different
Yeah.
things in one book. It's
Because
such
by
a
the cover, like
experience, yeah.
Chrissy's point, the cover is gorgeous, and I was like, oh, this will be a really this will be a coming of age YA story of, you know, a native culture. That's what I just assumed. So when I picked it up and it felt true crime. Like you feel like, so the hard, and then I was like, oh, this just pulls you in because there's this grittiness of this like, you know, mystery story. But everything Chrissy said too, you're so absorbed into the elders and this way of life that's contemporary, but so old and, you know, timeless. So she knocked it out of the park. And didn't you tell me that this author, this is her debut, and she's how old?
She's 55, and this is her first book.
Yeah.
So all of you aspiring writers out there,
Let's do this.
okay. I like to tell myself that.
Thank you, Christy. Oh, it's me again. Okay. So does anybody have any, I can't see any of the participants, but I will just plug along unless somebody wants to unmute and has a specific question, but we're happy to talk about all the books at the end too. So this is, I know some of you here are part of my YA for Adult book club, and this is a book we're going to talk about at the end of this month. So if you've never joined, we're happy to have you. I have copies at the library, so if you are interested in reading it and joining us in a few weeks, I'd love to have you. So this is, I actually think, and Christy or Liz, you might know, this is also option for a Netflix movie or show. I read that when I was like Googling the title, it came up. So, and it would make a great one. You did? Okay. So this is by Tess Sharp. I also think this is a very awesome. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And it will be starring Millie Bobby Brown, who is in Stranger Things. So if anybody loves Stranger Things, she's going to be in this movie, which is amazing.
This is going to be great. So this is The Girls I've Been, and it's about, I think she's still only 16-year-old Nora O'Malley. Oh no, she's 18 now at this point, gosh. And the opening scene is you think that it's just it lays it out like a YA novel where she's running to the bank on an errand, and the biggest drama in her life currently is that she is meeting her ex-boyfriend with her current girlfriend. They were all friends, and she used to date Wes, and now she's dating her friend Iris, her girlfriend. And so when you open the chapter, you know, like this is the biggest thing in her life, like, oh, this is going to be awkward. He caught us kissing, and now I have to kind of explain it to him. So they walk into the bank to, you know, put a deposit in for a fundraising event they did at the school, and in walk two guys behind them, and suddenly they're in the middle of a bank heist. This is a small town in Northern California, so it's like deputy sheriffs that are, you know, far away, and it's not like immediate response, and they hit the ground. And she immediately, you know, right from the start that this is not, you know, an average 18-year-old girl. She doesn't panic. It's like she dials into this other part of herself where she starts making calculations. She's checking out the way the two robbers are interacting with each other, who they're specifically asking for, because then she realizes quite quickly that they are not. It's not just a typical, I'm just getting for this bolt of just cash. Like it's a very deliberate thing, and the bank manager is not there. So now suddenly it turns into a hostage situation. Nora's background is that from when she was very little till she was 12 years old, Nora was not Nora. She had many different names, hence the title. Her mother was a grifter, a con artist, and so she raised her to be part of her cons. So each chapter, it's told in alternating chapters. So you start in the bank robbery scene of what's happening. And then the next chapter is you go back to when she was 8 years old and had to be Samantha. And Samantha always had her hair in braids and always acted like this. And her mom would choose men and ingratiate herself and use her daughter to be part of the con and to get as much money as possible, skip town, move on to the next one. So she has a lot of trauma. This book handles trauma. A lot of the characters have trauma very, very well, not just delicately, but in a way that you can respectfully, if that makes sense. And so you get the different, as you're learning about the different cons that she's had to pull when she was younger, in the present moment, you're getting how all of those skills are helping her get not herself out of this, but her, just her two friends, but everybody in there, because she is not your, like I said, not your average 18-year-old. So when she starts to realize, like, I need to out-con these con artists, it's this powerful moment. If you've ever watched Veronica Mars or any of those kind of murder mystery shows, you're like behind her 100%. But they're fully realized. It's not just like a fun romp where you're like, oh, this is fun. That's real. You know what I mean? Like I said, it treats her experiences and the experiences of her friends who also, have abusive parents and have been through things very respectfully. Like every character is so fully realized. One of my favorite characters is that she has an older sister that her mom had done the same thing with. And when she got out and was always in the peripheral of her life and saying, like, the minute you call, I will be there. I will get you out. Things hit ahead. I don't want to spoil too much, is of when her mom ended up falling in love with a con artist who got them into a situation. So she is not really Nora. You don't really know her name. So she's kind of trying to hide out with her sister. And her sister Lee is also not somebody that you'd want to mess with. So I don't want to say anything more than that, but it's very fast paced, but you are invested in these characters and you care about them. And I was very impressed that, not for a YA novel, but for a novel that has so much going on, that each character, even, her girlfriend and Wes, who you don't get, a lot of page time with, they are fully realized. So I can't wait to talk about it with some of you and hopefully all of you. So that is called The Girls I've Been. It's YA. It's by Tess Sharp. And I'm going to pass the baton to Liz.
Okay, so Every Last Fear is a debut novel from Alex Finley, and it has been praised a lot by some other writers, such as Karen Slaughter and Lisa Gardner, who are some of my favorite thriller writers, especially Karen Slaughter. I love her. And so it says on the cover that she recommended it, and I was like, I'm going to read that. And so this starts off following Matt, who is, Matt Pine. So it's basically, the book starts with a tragedy in Matt's life. And so he is informed that something happened to his family when they went to Mexico. And Matt is about 20, I think, 19, 20. He goes to NYU. He's a college student. So he's at college, is informed by the FBI that his family had suffered this tragedy while vacationing in Mexico. So then we find out that Matt has to go inform his older brother, Danny, about what happened to his family. But Danny is in a maximum security prison for murdering his high school girlfriend. So the tragedy with Matt's family and the murder of Danny's high school girlfriend are connected. And so we travel from New York to Mexico to Nebraska. There's an awesome, cool female FBI agent who's on Matt's side. There are politicians, mobsters. There's like a whole lot going on, but it all comes together. And it's just a really fast-paced, twisty thriller. So if you're a fan of thrillers, this is a perfect book. It's just, it has all the elements, like family, drama, and twists and turns and all that. So I thought it was a really good debut novel. I mean, I will say it wasn't completely perfect, but I felt like for a debut novel, this really like hit the mark.
I love a good dysfunctional family saga.
Yeah.
Christy's
sorry. The other about it is that it's told from multiple perspectives. So like we get to hear from, like, in the like past and present, like Matt's family that was in Mexico, his sister, his younger brother, his father, his mother. So you get all these perspectives on, you know, what happened with Danny in the murder when he was in high school. And it's interesting, and you really like most of the characters. You like the ones you're supposed to like.
I do love this cover. I have to say, I saw this cover a bunch when it was coming out, and I was with the red line. I mean, when you ever watch those movies or TV shows where they're constantly making those lines, I think I would get stressed out about doing that correctly more than getting to the actual solving of the mystery part.
Yeah, and I would say that this book, the FBI agent that I really liked in it is a smaller character, but I can see how you could build a series around that character. I mean, I don't know if we're going to do that, but
you should tell Alex Finley to do
I
that.
read that Alex Finley is a pseudonym.
Yes, I heard that
It's
too.
actually somebody else. There was some speculation that maybe it was AJ Finn, but
Oh.
nobody knows for sure.
You know, I was going to mention that, like
the mystery,
like AJ Finn, who wrote The Woman in the Window, and so, another mystery.
guys.
Oh, that is interesting.
Someone has to do some internet sleuthing. Caroline, I love Maggie O'Farrell.
This book is an older book. She wrote Hamnet this year that everybody's very excited about, but that is much harder to get than an older book like so it's readily available. This is about Daniel, an American professor who has this terrible divorce and this devastating custody battle. He's traveling through Ireland, and he stumbles on this woman who is this world famous actress who has disappeared and thought dead. And they begin a romance, and they end up being married, and they live in seclusion and have a family. But he has this like hidden secret in his past that threatening to unspool everything. So he sort of randomly decides to go off and try and sort that out. And it's interesting, this is told like they go like back and forth from present to the past, and it's told between like his kids, his receptionist, like all different people to like lay out what the actual secret is.
Murder. No. Don't answer that.
No, this is
family.
not a thriller. It is not a thriller.
I now, after we talked about the Ellen Hildebrand book with what was it, winter? No, summer, not summer and winter. What was it called?
Winter in Paradise.
Yes, and I was like, second families. I was like, everybody has like this. Oh, is this on audio? Caroline, do you know if This Must Be the Place is on? I could check while we talk.
I wouldn't be surprised. She's pretty popular,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, she did her. I've read two of her Hamnet. It's historical fiction, guys. I read that this year. I don't know why I'm defending myself on historical fiction now, but her books are so character driven. You know, that's so that to me is like slowly realized characters. It's like not slow, but you're just absorbed into their lives. What's the one? Okay, never mind, doesn't matter. But the one, Christy, you read it too, where it's like the present time is like the woman who's having a baby, and then you like dealing with the first few days of motherhood, and then the first that
the hand that first held mine.
Yeah, that was a beautiful. That was
beautiful. But don't read it if you're about to give birth, or don't read it before you have children. That's my recommendation, my personal recommendation. And yes, it is on audiobook. I just looked it up.
I was just looking at
it. Thank you. Oh, good. It's on Libby. Okay.
It's great,
you guys.
With a really like nice, well-rounded read.
Miss Patty.
I'm up next. Okay, so the next book that I'm going to buzz about is also nonfiction. It was written, or it was published in 2020, and the author is Stephen Peculia, and he's a local author and historian, and he has been here to speak before about another one of his books, Dark Tide, which was about the molasses flood in Boston in 1919. And I thought that was a fascinating book. And so this one caught my eye, and I really, really liked this book. I thought it was a fascinating story. Is, as the title indicates, the USS Jamestown, the Irish Famine, and the remarkable story of America's first humanitarian mission. So during the potato famine, or as it was called, the Great Hunger, which began in 1846, there were 5,000 ships that left Ireland with people trying to get away from the starvation, just trying to go someplace where they could survive. And no ships were going there. And so this story is, he pretty much gets, it's taken from diaries and letters from 3 different people involved in it. One is Robert Bennett Forbes, and he was a sea captain. He was from Milton. Another one was Father Tibble Matthew, who was a Catholic priest in County Cork, who was devoted to helping the starving Irish people at this time during this horrible starvation and subsequent oppression by the British people, the British government. And so, and then the third one is Charles Trevelyan, who was the British representative for, representing the Crown in Ireland, for famine relief. And he created the work program because he didn't think that these starving people should just be given the food. He felt that they had to work for the food first. So these people who were literally worked to death in some cases because they were just trying to get food for their families because their families were starving. So as these stories of the starvation and this just like unspeakable horror in Ireland started to get out, when people were leaving the country and coming to the United States, the American people really rallied around this idea that they could provide humanitarian relief and that they could take private donations of food and money and somehow get it to Ireland to feed the people in Ireland. So Robert Bennett Forbes, who was the sea captain, basically was the engine kind of driving this idea. So in 1847, in February, Congress approved the use of an old warship for civilian use with a civilian crew, stripped of its guns, to carry 10,000 tons of food to.
Not potatoes, right?
Oh, no. So they donated the food, and it was rich and poor in America. Everybody was just sort of captivated by the idea that they could actually help these starving people. So you can see on the cover, it's actually a powerful scene when you're reading the book, because they get the approval in February of 1847 from Congress, and then a month later, this old warship, which has been stripped of everything and loaded up with food, sets sail from Boston Harbor and then makes its way to Cork. In the meantime, he has, through correspondence with his father, Tibble Matthew, has set up sort of an infrastructure for when they get there. How is the food going to be distributed? So I thought it was a very moving book. I was actually moved to tears in a lot of, a lot of parts of it, having Irish heritage myself. But I think it's a really, really well written book. He just tells a great story. So this is another one that I don't know if it was as popular as it should have been, but I really love this book.
Thank you. 2020 I feel like I missed so many books that,
Yeah.
Came out over it and things were delayed and stuff. So
Right.
I think I'm glad that I learned about it tonight. Thank you, Patty.
Yes.
Okay, Christy.
So my second pick is Raft of Stars by Andrew J. Graff, also a debut novel, I believe. And so I should say, even though this story has 2 10-year-old boys who are the main characters, it's not a kid's book, it's an adult book. So this book takes place in the mid-1990s, and it tells the story of these 2 10-year-old best friends. Their names are Dale Bradwin and Fisher Branson. but they go by Bread and Fish because of their names. So those are their nicknames. And so they're best friends. They love to spend their summers running around the woods. They live in a small town in Wisconsin. That's where this book takes place. And they love running around the woods, hunting. Fish lives in the suburbs in Wisconsin, but he comes to this small town every summer to stay with his grandfather. His grandfather's name is Teddy. He's a Korean War veteran. He's a man of few words. He's very gruff, but he's loving. He loves having the boys around. But Bread lives with his father. His father is also a widower. He's the town mechanic, but he is a mean drunk and he beats up Bread. And so one day, Bread and Fish have just spent like a weekend running around, having a blast in the woods, and it's time for Bread to go home. And whenever this happens, Fish always notices, because you get Fish's perspective a lot. Fish always notices that Bread kind of like droops and starts to shake a little bit, which is so sad because he knows he has to go home and face his dad. And so they say goodbye, they go their separate ways. And then Fish has this moment where he's like, you know what? It's not fair. I'm tired of Bread living this life. I'm going back right now and I'm going to tell him to come back to my house. He doesn't have to do this. He doesn't have to be with his dad. So he goes back to Bread's house and he walks in on his dad beating him up. He looks like he's choking him. And he picks up a gun, which happens to be nearby. There's a lot of guns in this book. A lot of people hunt. And he points it at Bread's dad and it goes off. Bread's dad falls. There's blood and the boys take off. So they run off into the woods and they say to themselves that we've been training for this, basically, like we love trying to survive in the woods. Like that's what we're going to do. We're going now. So they get some supplies and they disappear. They leave a note for Fish's grandfather. Like, we're sorry we took your stuff, but we're going into the woods. And we didn't mean to kill Bread's dad. We're gone. Bye. So they're gone. So then Fish's grandfather finds the note and he has to talk to Sheriff Cal. So Sheriff Cal is another character in this book. And the minute I met him on the page, I immediately thought of the actor Timothy Oliphant. I don't know if you know who this actor is.
Wait, Justified?
Justified.
You're telling me it was Justified? Sorry. You just sold half the virtual Zoom. I was like, I'm sorry, Timothy Oliphant.
Yeah, so I know he's a beloved, attractive male actor. And so this is like a looser, because he's often like uptight. This is like a looser version of him, but he's always a cop. And so that's what I pictured. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about these other characters. So Sheriff Cal, he used to be a cop in Houston, in Texas, and he was sort of disgraced there because he might have a little drinking problem. And he had befriended this woman and her son, and their husband and father was an abusive alcoholic as well. And he gets out of jail and Sheriff Cal beat him up. And so you can't beat up people when you're a cop. So he is asked to leave the department, but his chief does him a favor and finds him a job as a sheriff in this small middle of nowhere town in Wisconsin. So Sheriff Cal finds himself, like, he grew up in the suburbs of Houston and he doesn't know like where he is or what he is doing. He doesn't know anything about hunting. He doesn't know anything about woods, horses, farms, and that's like all that's around. So he's the sheriff in this like tiny town. And so he gets this call and it's very funny. I have to say there's a lot of moments that are super charming and funny in this book. And he gets the call. And when he gets the call, he's in this gas station and there's a woman who works at the gas station named Tiffany. And Tiffany is another main character. She is like 25. She's kind of like town outlier. She has blue hair and she feels like she's lost in this town. She didn't mean to stick around, but she's there. She's stuck. She doesn't know what to do. And she has a crush on Sheriff Cal. Sheriff Cal has a crush on her. And neither one of them will do anything about it. But you get their perspectives of each other, like, and that's very charming.
Sounds like a romance, Christy.
I told you, I like it when it's in the book. So the fourth character you have to know about, and then there's no more characters, I promise, is Miranda. And she is Fish's mother. And so you remember Fish spends his summers with his grandfather in this small town, but he lives with his mother most of the year. So his mother, also a widower, a lot of widowers, a lot of former tragedy in this book that people are sort of working through. her husband, Fish's dad, died fighting overseas during the Middle Eastern conflicts in the 90s. And so she is super fierce personality, very religious, like very strong in her faith. And so when they find out that the boys have disappeared, these two unlikely duos sort of pair up under different circumstances. Sheriff Cal and Teddy, who's like a man of the woods. Teddy is Fish's grandfather. And Miranda and Tiffany, the woman who works in the gas station. And so a few different things happen that I don't want to give away, but basically the second half of the book, you find yourself in the woods where the boys are escaping. They build, it's very reminiscent of Huck Finn. They're building a raft. They're trying to escape on the raft. And Miranda and Tiffany are trying to find the boys. Sheriff Cal and Teddy are trying to find the boys. The boys are trying to avoid them. And so it's I didn't think that this was my kind of book at first, but the minute I started reading it, I was completely pulled in. So charming. It would be such a good movie. It feels like a classic. It feels a little bit like Stand By Me at times. Feels a little bit like The Goonies. It also reminds me of like 90s literary fiction, if you know what I mean, because the writing is really beautiful and like you just want to keep going, and the characters are so likable. You just love them all. So that's Raft of Stars.
Good.
Lizzie's showing me Timothy Olyphant.
I was gonna say I like Sheriff Cal already.
I hope they
This
make
is
a
the
movie
context
and
of
cast him
why I was
because he
like,
would be perfect as Sheriff Cal. I love
you need
Sheriff
to
Cal.
tell him. You need to tell him. Get that sorted.
I'll get in touch with Hollywood right now.
Okay. Miss Abby.
Oh, so here, wow, I got a good glimpse as my first book was, and I got a glimpse and a front row seat into how it's run. So I loved this book. So the book I'm talking about tonight is The Push by Ashley Audrey, and it's a debut novel by her. So I just want to read to you the review that I wrote to a friend of mine. And this friend of mine, she and I were strangers, but the thing that brought us together is that we became mothers together, and we both were transplants in New Hampshire. And so she and I have really connected on these types of books, thrillers. This is more of a psychological drama. And before I go into the description, this book has received 2 awards. So the 2 awards, it's Library Reads Favorites and Lone Star's Favorite. It's one of those books that I was looking forward to reading, and I would make the time. I couldn't wait to finish this book. And I read this book on Libby. So something I'd want to mention to everyone too, just opens up your world to books and audiobooks. So, but this is the description that I wrote to my friend Claire, the mother, and we became mothers together. So generations of dysfunctional motherhood lands on the shoulders of Blythe Connor when she gives birth to Violet. Blythe tries very hard to be a good mother, but Violet isn't an easy child. She becomes concerned about her daughter's propensity to harm other children, especially at the arrival of their second child, their son Sam, whom she connects to instantly. Blythe's world and her family's world comes crashing down, and that's an event that I will not give away. And the question she's left with, is it her daughter's fault, or did she imagine it? So there are a couple of things here. There are some very visceral scenes I could relate to. The book is written from Blythe's point of view. It's if she's writing a letter to her husband, who there's no spoiler, she's no longer with him, and you get that glance into that life from the beginning of the book. She's looking into the window of his new life. But so it goes into dysfunctional families and the twilight zone of early motherhood. Is she losing her mind? Did these things really happen? And the way that this woman writes, there are days I can remember, like how she was not able to connect to her child and the guilt that ensued as a result of that, but then how easily she was able to connect to her her son who was born after. And then the jealousy, the way that it disrupted the marriage, but also, I guess I think about, it's hard to dislike a child character, but it was easy in the way that she wrote it. So she's doing the author's doing her job very, very well. So I highly, highly recommend this book. And when I finished it, I literally said out loud, no. So I highly recommend this book, and using it. I mentioned to Lizzie, I don't know how many of you use Hoopla or Libby, but for me, thank you, Lizzie.
I mean, it's fine.
It has opened up a world for me, and I'm just able to just read on my smart device. Let me get this for you. I tried really hard to figure out a way to do some sharing on my screens, but I couldn't figure it out. I will the next time. If you're not familiar with Libby or Hoopla, it's just an app you can download on your smart device. I gotta look at my own camera so I can see. I normally don't like to do that. So you probably can't see all my apps, but Libby here is an app that you can download on your smart device, and you can upload books that are available or put books on hold. And it's just another way to access books and audiobooks. And Hoopla is a streaming service that the Westwood Public Library offers. And with Hoopla, not only do you get books, but you get audiobooks, you get music, and you get movies, and it's another great streaming service. I don't know how familiar everyone is with that, and it's another app here. So one of the gifts I got for Easter, well, my husband and I bought ourselves a Kindle because he sees me struggling reading my phone or reading on my phone at night. And I think I talked to Caroline too about Kindles and how she uses them as well. So there is a way to get these titles onto a Kindle. And I'm not promoting Amazon or Amazon devices. I just find that this is the way. I don't have, especially now, say with pandemic, you don't get access to books, or they may just be limited. The libraries have opened up access to these titles through Hoopla and Libby. And if you have one of these smart devices, I highly, highly recommend downloading those two apps and just playing around with them. And we, as the librarians, are also available to answer any questions about that, because that is how I read this wonderful book. Wonderful. I keep thinking about this book, and that was my access to this book. So thank you.
And when you said it's really hard to dislike a child character, I want to know if anybody can guess what child character came to mind that I was like, that's really easy to dislike. Can you think of it? Anybody guess? What's like Christy, come on, what's a famous character?
Caillou?
What? No, Caillou, yes. But I was thinking of a book series that every first and second grader.
Can you be Jones?
Yes, Judy. I mean, we like her, but like after reading aloud the second book, you're like, hey, Judy, all right.
It's not for you, grown up. It's for kids.
I know. Yes, thank you for that. And I will say that, so the Maggie O'Farrell book is on Hoopla. I will check to see. I didn't check beforehand. I should have, to see which ones of our titles were available on Hoopla, because Hoopla, we know they're instantly, we could all start reading it right away. Libby, depending on what title it is, you might have to wait for it, but we do have extra copies available of the books that we talked about tonight at the library. So you can give us a call tomorrow, or you can email us. We're happy to. Does anybody have any questions about any of the books we talked about, or want to share something that you guys are reading or interested in? We're happy to talk.
I have a question. So, yeah, I know you talked. I have never been able to figure out how to link Hoopla to a Kindle. Is that possible?
Yeah. So with I have a Kindle Fire
because I can do it with Libby, but I was not able to figure out how to do Hoopla to a Kindle.
Okay, this is a question that I have fielded a lot these 12 months, and it depends on the type of Kindle that you have. This is a Kindle Fire, and
okay.
And we are able to download apps on this. So if you're able to download the app, then
I have a paper. So I have a Paperwhite, so you can't. All right, so that answers my question. But I can put it on my iPad if I wanted to.
You
Because I have the
yes.
Hoopla app. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that
thank
would be
you.
the way to go. Yeah, on your iPad, and then definitely Libby goes to your Kindle. And that when we were discussing about a device to open up our world to books, I was like, Kindle, and then we're locked into Amazon, and it's like sort of a company type of thing. And I've heard so much griping about it, like over the year, that like I didn't think it was worth it. But this is a new version that we're able to access or download the app. So
Right.
yeah, I think that there is a workaround, but don't hold me to that. Maybe I'll do some more investigation through Google Play that you can
It's
do some
okay.
like crazy.
I just know I tried to figure it out. I'm like, I can't read this on my phone, but I could do it on my iPad.
Yeah.
But the Paperwhite I love because it's so light.
Yeah.
Paperwhite.
That
I know
backlight.
from Libby you can do it onto the Kindle, but not the.
Mhm.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Welcome.
Marlene, did you have a question? Hi.
I had to figure out how to unmute myself. Actually, so Abby, will we be able to follow up with you on the difference in these devices? I feel like I've blown up my iPad to the point where the pages barely move because I've downloaded so much stuff on it, and it's an old one. So I'll be looking forward to maybe following up on the difference between some of these different devices.
Sure, but yes, absolutely. The devices and how they interact with these streaming services. Absolutely. I think, that we should definitely get like a how-to and FAQ together, but even I can follow up with you after.
That would be great. Like maybe
Okay.
have an informative session. Like I'm not rushing into a store right now to
Yep.
do some shopping, but I'd like to be prepared to make like an informed purchase and not be disappointed. But for those who haven't used it, when I use Libby on my iPad, one of the features I really enjoy, particularly if it's a book that has a lot of voices and a lot of different characters, I find if I put it down for a day, then when I pick it up, I may not remember like whose brother-in-law is this or who.
Yeah.
I love being able to use the search feature and put the person's name in, and then be able to see when did they first appear in the book, and maybe, and I find that very, very helpful. So for those who want to look for maybe why it might be something that you might like rather than a book, that's something I enjoy. And just, I have a question for Lizzie about your first book that you mentioned about Finlay.
Yes.
From your description, it sounded like it could almost be a Stephanie Plum book.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good, and yes, that's a perfect where it's like light. It's funny. She's in this situation. That's a perfect, because I love Stephanie.
That's what
That's
I'm
a great, yeah.
I'm done with Stephanie's, I could write some of the stories at this point.
I know.
I need something light right now.
Yeah.
And that sounds like it would be perfect. And a comment to Patty, you've confirmed for me that I'm going to read The Splendid and the Vile. And your description of Eric Larson is the way I feel about him from having read his book In the Garden of the Beast. Did you read that book?
I did. It was such a fascinating book.
And
it was
what
great.
I would highlight for people who maybe don't read nonfiction or are a little fearful of it, I find that and you described it beautifully, his style takes what he's researched and creates a narrative that you can get involved in. And I appreciate the fact that when he can't find a corroborating piece of evidence, but he's almost assuming something, at least he did this in the Garden of the Beast, he would actually write, I think these two may have met, or they may have talked about such and such, but I couldn't find rather than just imply something that he doesn't know. And I appreciate that about him. So this was great. Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah. And I that is good to hear about nonfiction, because I do feel like intimidated when I hear nonfiction. I was like, it's gonna be like homework or something. So to hear that it's more narrative and more involved in the story, it's
Nonfiction is great. Just ask Patty. It's great.
So,
Oh, yeah.
about In the Garden of the Beast, one of the characters is the daughter of the US ambassador to Berlin. in this book. She also appears in a historical fiction book written by, I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, Jennifer Cheverini, The
Oh.
Resistance Women. So that
Oh.
daughter appears in another book.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I haven't read that one yet, but it'd be interesting to me to read a book where a character in the nonfiction appears in historical fiction.
Yeah,
to
and to
see if
see
it
how
gets-
they flesh
how
her
it-
out, right?
The background.
That's great. Thank you. And I like your power user tip. That's great about searching for the names.
Mhm.
Well, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions about any of the books or anything? No? Okay. Well, if you do, you know where to find us.
Yeah.
And thank you guys for showing up tonight. We were
Thank you.
we were
Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
we were unsure.
Thank
so
you.
Thank
Thanks.
It
you.
was
Thank-
great.
I'll be calling
Thank you
tomorrow.
guys.
Thank
Okay,
you
Yeah.
very much.
good. Night, everybody.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone, thank you.